Welcome to the InnoGuide Podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. In episode number 28, we're sharing Part 1 of Lies I Taught in Medical School by Robert Lufkin, MD. Forward by Dr. Jason Fung, MD. After I published my third book, The Cancer Code, I got an email from Dr. Robert Lufkin. He congratulated me on the book and shared some fascinating research he was working on. One of his MRI studies could detect Alzheimer's disease a full 10 years before a typical clinical diagnosis by using biomarkers in the brain. Another study tracked liver fat content to better monitor metabolic diseases like insulin resistance. And get this, our mutual colleague, Dr. Charlene Lichtosh, was testing all her patients for free. I was immediately intrigued because this kind of work ties directly into my own research on fasting and metabolic health. For years, Megan Ramos and I have been running a program to help people use intermittent fasting as a sustainable way to lose weight and improve their health. The fasting method, if you're curious. I've also written 3 books, The Obesity Code, The Diabetes Code, and The Cancer Code, all of which focus on how metabolic health is the key to preventing and managing chronic diseases. And let me tell you, the medical establishment has gotten so much of this wrong. What's interesting is that Robert and I both ended up in the same place, focusing on metabolic health, but we got there in very different ways. Back in the late 1990s, we were both at UCLA. He was a professor in radiology, and I was studying nephrology. I spent my time treating kidney disease, which, as you probably know, is often caused by type 2 diabetes. And most of those patients with diabetes were also struggling with obesity. I was starting to connect the dots between these chronic illnesses and metabolic health. Meanwhile, Robert was coming at it from a different angle, looking at the root cause, metabolism itself. Back then, metabolism wasn't really a focus in medical school. It was something we thought dietitians dealt with. Boy, were we wrong. Now Robert is working to set the record straight. His book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, is all about changing what future doctors learn and what the public believes about health. He dives into how metabolism is the key to preventing chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, and even cancer, and he backs it all up with research. One of the things I really appreciate about Robert's work is that he shares my enthusiasm for fasting. I've often said that fasting is one of the few things that all major religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism, agree on. It's part of a healthy life, and Robert gets that. We also both agree that lifestyle and metabolic factors play a huge role in chronic diseases. Fixing your diet, not relying on drugs, is the real solution. Let me give you an example. In the Obesity Code, I argue that obesity isn't about calorie imbalance, it's about hormonal imbalance. The idea that a calorie is a calorie is just wrong. Think about it. A calorie of olive oil and a calorie of sugar have completely different effects on your body. Sugar spikes your blood glucose and insulin levels, while olive oil doesn't. It's the hormonal response that matters. That's why simply cutting calories and exercising more doesn't work for most people. At the heart of all these chronic diseases, whether it's obesity, diabetes, or cancer, is one major driver: growth factors, especially insulin. And that's where Robert and I are completely aligned. His book challenges the outdated ideas that we're all taught in medical school and replaces them with the latest research and findings. It's the same controversial conclusion I came to in my own work. Metabolic health is the key to lasting health and longevity. So if you're ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about health, I couldn't recommend Robert's book more. It's a game changer. Preface and mea culpa. So, I've spent most of my career writing for a very specific academic audience, scientific papers, textbooks, kind of stuff that's packed with details, references, and technical jargon. But when it came to writing this book, I realized that approach just wouldn't work. The message I wanted to share here is way too important to bury under layers of complexity. People need this information to make better choices about their health and longevity, and I wanted to make it accessible to everyone. That said, Simplifying things wasn't easy for me. My natural instinct is to dive deep into the details, but I knew that could be overwhelming or even counterproductive for a general audience. Thankfully, I had my co-author, Joshua Lysek, to help me out. He's the one who made sure this book is readable, enjoyable, and even entertaining. He kept me from turning it into just another dense textbook and helped me strike a balance, simplifying without oversimplifying. If you find a part of the book that's crystal clear and easy to understand, that's Joshua's magic at work. But if something feels oversimplified or just plain wrong, that's on me. Now, let me be upfront. Each of the lies I talk about in this book could easily be a book on its own. There are already deeper, more technical books on these topics. I've listed some at the end of the book if you're curious. My goal here was to keep things simple and actionable, even if that meant leaving out some of the nitty-gritty details. The lies I discuss are really just hypotheses, imperfect models of reality that might be replaced with better ones in the future. That's how science works, after all. What I present as truth today might be seen as outdated or even wrong in a few decades, and honestly, that's humbling. Speaking of humility, I want to make something clear. I haven't personally conducted peer-reviewed research in most of the areas I cover in this book. That might sound like a downside, but I actually think it's a strength. As a generalist, I can connect the dots across different fields and present a broader perspective. I've read as much of the scientific literature as I can, and I've done my best to filter out the bad science and focus on what seems closest to the truth. But I'm human, and I've probably made mistakes. I encourage you to question everything I say and everything anyone else says for that matter. Always look critically at the evidence. This book is a departure from my usual style. In the past, I've written for technical audiences, focusing on information over entertainment. Here, I've tried to make the ideas engaging and easy to grasp. That meant resisting my urge to go down every rabbit hole of detail. Instead, I've aimed to simplify complex concepts without losing their essence. Now let me tell you where I'm coming from. I don't have any hidden agenda here. No dog in the race, as they say. My only goal is to figure out the best ways for people to achieve health and longevity. I've experimented with all kinds of diets myself, vegan, carnivore, low-fat, low-carb, you name it. These days, I avoid processed foods as much as possible because that's what the evidence seems to support. But if new research came out tomorrow proving that drinking Coca-Cola was the healthiest choice, I'd be the first to apologize to Coke and start ordering it by the case. I also want to be clear that I'm not anti-big pharma, anti-big food, or anti-government. I recognize that large organizations can sometimes implement policies effectively. But I also know that they're not immune to biases, especially when there's a lot of money involved. Those biases can have a huge impact on public health, and we need to examine them critically. That's what this book is all about, taking a closer look at the lies we've been told and exploring better alternatives. So, here's to questioning everything, learning together, and hopefully finding some truths along the way. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. I did everything right and almost died anyway. Let me start with a confession. I did everything right. I followed all the rules. I trusted the science and lived by the advice I was taught in medical school. And yet, I almost died anyway. That's what this book is about. The lies I believed, the lies I taught, and the truths I eventually uncovered that saved my life. Growing up, I was steeped in the world of nutrition and health. My mom was a dietitian who worked in hospitals well into her 80s. We followed all the official dietary guidelines to the letter: low-fat, high-carb meals, margarine instead of butter, egg whites instead of whole eggs. We believed we were doing everything right. And when I went to medical school, I doubled down on those beliefs. I became a professor, teaching other doctors the same, quote, settled science I had learned. I was a radiologist, which meant I had to know a little bit about every part of the body and every disease. I also did research, received millions in grants, and worked closely with drug companies. I was the ultimate insider, a spokesperson for the medical establishment. Then in my 50s, I developed 4 chronic diseases: hypertension, gout, dyslipidemia, abnormal cholesterol levels, and prediabetes. These were the same conditions that killed my father in his 80s. The difference? I was still young with daughters under 10 years old. I wasn't going to live long enough to see them graduate high school. That was my wake-up call. How could this be happening to me? I had followed all the rules. I had done everything right, and yet I was dying. That's when I realized something was deeply wrong with the medical system I had trusted my whole life. I started questioning everything I thought I knew, and I was lucky. 2 things helped me to see the truth. First, I had a friend, Gary Taubes, a science journalist who had made a career out of exposing bad science. He was just starting to investigate the lies behind nutrition science, and his work completely changed my perspective. His books, like Good Calories, Bad Calories, revealed that low-fat diets, the very thing I had been raised on, weren't helping us. In fact, they were making us sicker. That realization hit me like a bomb. If that was wrong, what else was? Second, as a radiologist, I had a unique perspective. I saw the physical manifestations of chronic diseases every day. Fatty livers, clogged arteries, brain atrophy in Alzheimer's patients, diabetic ulcers. I started digging into the scientific literature, re-educating myself and connecting the dots. What I found was shocking. The diseases I had been taught to think of as separate, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, arthritis, were all connected. They were all metabolic diseases driven by the same underlying dysfunction. And the rates of these diseases were skyrocketing. Today, 40% of adults in the U.S. have multiple chronic diseases, and our healthy life expectancy is actually decreasing for the first time in history. We're in the middle of a medical crisis, and most people don't even realize it. So what went wrong? Let me give you a preview of the 3 biggest lies I believed and taught in medical school. 1. The obesity lie. A calorie is just a calorie. We've been told that obesity is simply a matter of eating too many calories. If you want to lose weight, just eat less and exercise more, right? Wrong. This oversimplified calories in, calories out model ignores the role of insulin, the hormone that tells your body to store fat. Not all calories are created equal. Carbohydrates, for example, spike insulin levels far more than fats or protein, which means they're much more likely to be stored as fat. The low-fat, high-carb diets we were told to follow in the 70s, thanks to flawed studies and political agendas, turned our bodies into fat-storing machines. That's why obesity rates have skyrocketed since then. It's not about willpower, it's about biology. 2. The diabetes lie. Type 2 diabetes is best treated with insulin. Type 2 diabetes is caused by chronic high levels of insulin, which lead to insulin resistance. Yet the standard treatment is to give patients more insulin. This might lower blood sugar in the short term, but it worsens the underlying problem and drives other chronic diseases. The real solution? Address the root cause by reducing the refined carbohydrates and the sugars that spike insulin in the first place. I've seen patients reverse their diabetes by switching to a low-carb, ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting. But the medical system is number 3, the heart disease lie. Saturated fats and cholesterol cause heart disease. For decades, we've been told to avoid saturated fats and cholesterol to protect our hearts. This advice was based on flawed studies like Ansel Keys' infamous 7 countries study, which cherry-picked data to make it look like dietary fat caused heart disease. In reality, the rise in heart disease coincided with the shift to low-fat, high-carb diets. We replaced natural fats with processed vegetable oils and sugars, which turned out to be far worse for our health. And let's not forget the role of the sugar industry, which paid scientists to shift the blame for heart disease away from sugar and onto fat. The result? A trillion-dollar industry built on bad science. These are just a few of the lies we'll explore in this book, and by lies, I don't necessarily mean intentional deception, although sometimes that's the case. Many of these falsehoods started as honest mistakes, but they've been perpetuated by financial incentives, institutional biases, and a reluctance to question the status quo. This isn't a diet book. I'm not here to give you a strict plan to follow. Instead, I want to give you the tools to understand what's really going on in your body and how to make informed choices about your health. We'll talk about nutrition, of course, but also about other factors like stress, sleep, toxins, and genetics. And we'll dive into the lies about aging, which isn't just wear and tear, but something we can actually influence. I know this might sound radical, but remember, I'm not a fringe figure. I'm the establishment. I've spent my career teaching at top medical schools, publishing peer-reviewed research, and working with drug companies. But as a scientist, I have to follow the evidence, even when it leads me away from everything I thought was true. That's what this book is about, tearing back the cover to reveal the corruption, incompetence, and ignorance that have shaped our understanding of health and disease. And most importantly, it's about the truths that can save your life. Let's get started. Chapter 2. The Metabolic Lie. Let me tell you a little secret. For most of my career, I didn't think much about metabolism. In medical school, it was just this boring topic about how the body digests foods and turns it into energy. That's what I was taught, and that's what I taught my students. Metabolism was something for dietitians to worry about, not real doctors like me. We were focused on treating diseases like heart disease and cancer, not preventing them, and certainly not thinking about how metabolism might be the root cause of those diseases, or even aging itself. But then as I started digging into the research, thanks to my friend Gary Taubes and others, I realized how wrong I'd been. Metabolism isn't just about food or energy. It's the foundation of everything in the body: growth, repair, survival, and yes, even aging. It's the root cause of all the major chronic diseases we face today. This was a complete paradigm shift for me. I had spent decades ignoring one of the most important aspects of health, and I wasn't alone. The entire medical establishment had been doing the same thing. So let's break it down. What is metabolism really about, and how does it connect to the chronic diseases that are killing us? The three macronutrients: what we eat and why it matters. So let's talk about these basic three macronutrients: fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Two of these, fats and proteins, are essential for survival. Without them, you die. The third, carbohydrates, is not essential. Your body can make everything it needs from fats and proteins, so technically, you don't need carbs in your diet at all. Now, humans are incredibly adaptable. We can survive on a wide range of diets, from plant-based vegan diets to meat-heavy carnivore diets, as long as we get enough fats and proteins. Historically, we've done just that. For example, the Maasai tribe in Kenya thrived on a diet of mostly meat, milk, and blood, high in fat and cholesterol. On the other hand, ancient vegetarians, like the followers of Pythagoras, avoided meat entirely. And then there were the Mongols, who built the largest land empire in history while eating a diet of mostly meat and dairy. Point is, humans can survive on either end of the spectrum as long as we get the essential macronutrients. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, are a different story. They're not essential, but they become a huge part of our modern diet. And that's where the trouble starts. Metabolism. More than just energy. When I was teaching, I thought metabolism was just about breaking down food into energy. But it's so much more than that. Metabolism is the body's way of deciding when to grow and when to repair itself. It's like a switch that flips between these two modes, growth mode and repair mode. And the switch is controlled by a protein called TOR, T-O-R, short for target of rapamycin. Think of TOR as a queen ruling over a medieval kingdom. When food is abundant, Queen TOR raises the feast banner. The gates are open, the kingdom focuses on growth, building new structures, storing food, and defending against invaders. But when food is scarce, she raises the famine banner, the gates close, and the kingdom shifts to survival mode, repairing what's broken, using stored food, and conserving resources. This is how our bodies are supposed to work. When food is plentiful, TOR activates growth processes. When it's scarce, TOR shuts down growth and activates repair processes like autophagy, kind of cellular cleanup where the body recycles damaged cells. This balance between growth and repair is crucial for health and longevity. The problem: TOR is stuck in growth mode. In our modern world, TOR is almost always stuck in growth mode. Why? Because we're constantly eating, especially high-carb foods that spike insulin and activate TOR. Back in the days of hunter-gatherers, food wasn't always available. People went through natural cycles of feasting and fasting, which allowed TOR to switch between growth and repair. But with the advent of agriculture and later processed foods, we started eating more frequently and consuming more carbohydrates. This locked TOR in growth mode, leading to chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and a host of other problems. The consequences: chronic diseases and aging. When TOR is stuck in growth mode, it drives the development of chronic diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and even cancer. It also suppresses autophagy, which means damaged cells and proteins don't get cleaned up. Over time, this leads to the accumulation of senescent or zombie cells that contribute to aging and inflammation. This constant growth mode is also at the heart of metabolic syndrome, a cluster of conditions that include obesity, especially around the abdomen, high blood sugar, hyperglycemia or diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, low HDL, good cholesterol, high triglycerides. If you have 3 or more of these symptoms, you have metabolic syndrome. And guess what? Most American adults have it. This is a direct result of our modern diet and lifestyle, which keep TOR activated and our bodies in a perpetual state of growth. So how did we get here? The shift to agriculture was the first major turning point. Before farming, humans ate a diverse diet of animal products and gathered plants. But with agriculture, we became dependent on a few starchy crops like wheat, rice, and corn. These crops provided more calories but fewer nutrients, leading to poorer health. Skeletal records show that early farmers were shorter and less healthy than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. The second turning point was the Industrial Revolution, which brought mass farming and processed foods. These foods are high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, which are perfect for keeping TOR in growth mode. Combine that with the fact that we're eating more frequently than ever before. Snacks, anyone? And it's no wonder we're facing an epidemic of chronic diseases. The solution? Restoring balance. The key to fixing this is restoring balance between growth and repair. We need to give our bodies a chance to switch TOR off and activate repair processes like autophagy. This can be done through dietary changes. Reducing carbohydrates and focusing on fats and proteins can help lower insulin levels and deactivate TOR. Fasting. Periods of fasting or intermittent fasting can give the body a break it needs to repair itself. Or lifestyle changes. Reducing stress, improving sleep, and staying active can also support metabolic health. Looking ahead, metabolism is so much more than just digesting food. It's the foundation of health, aging, and disease. By understanding how it works and how modern life has disrupted it, we can start to take control of our health. In the chapters ahead, we'll dive deeper into the chronic diseases caused by metabolic dysfunction and explore how we can use this knowledge to live longer, healthier lives. It's time to flip the switch. Let's get started. Chapter 3, The Obesity Lie. Let's talk about one of the biggest lies in health and weight loss, the idea that to lose weight, all you need to do is eat less and exercise more, in quotes. This advice has been repeated for decades by doctors, public health officials, and even the Surgeon General. But it doesn't work. If it did, we wouldn't be in the middle of an obesity epidemic with nearly 3/4 of American adults overweight or obese. Clearly, something is wrong with this approach. Before we dive into why this advice is flawed, let's take a step back and look at how we think about obesity. In recent years, there's been a cultural shift towards body positivity, which promotes the idea that you can be healthy at any size. While I agree that fat shaming is harmful and unacceptable, we can't ignore the fact that obesity is a serious health risk. It's linked to almost every chronic disease you can think of: diabetes, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, and even cancer. Obesity isn't just about appearance, it's about health. And while it may have had survival value in the past, in today's world of food abundance, it's become a disease of excess. The two models of obesity: calories versus insulin. For decades, the medical establishment has relied on the energy balance model, EBM, to explain obesity. This model says that weight gain is simply a matter of consuming more calories than you burn. If you eat too much and don't exercise enough, the excess calories are stored as fat. Sounds simple, right? But this model ignores a critical factor: insulin. The newer carbohydrate insulin model, CIM, offers a different explanation. It says that rapidly digestible carbohydrates, like sugar and refined grains, spike insulin levels, which tells your body to store fat. Insulin doesn't just regulate blood sugar, it's also the hormone that drives fat storage. In this model, it's not just about how many calories you eat, it's about what kind of calories you eat and how they affect your insulin levels. The key takeaway is this: calories are necessary but not sufficient for weight gain. Insulin is required. If your insulin levels are low, you won't store fat, no matter how many calories you consume. But if your insulin levels are high, your body will store fat, even if you're eating fewer calories. The benefits of obesity: survival insurance. Believe it or not, obesity isn't all bad, at least not in certain situations. Throughout history, carrying extra fat was a survival advantage during times of famine or food scarcity. For example, during the Ice Age, obese women may have been seen as symbols of fertility and survival, as evidenced by the Venus figurines, ancient sculptures of women with exaggerated body fat. These figures likely represented the idea that extra fat could help women survive harsh conditions and carry pregnancies to term. Even in modern times, we've seen how fat can sustain the body during extreme conditions. Take the case of Angus Barberi, a 27-year-old man from Scotland who weighed 450 pounds. Under medical supervision, he fasted for an incredible 382 days, consuming only water, tea, coffee, and vitamins. By the end of his fast, he had lost 275 pounds and experienced no ill effects. His body survived by burning its fat stores for energy, proving that fat can be a powerful survival tool. But obesity is only beneficial in specific short-term situations. In today's world, where food is always available, chronic obesity becomes a major health problem. It's no longer about survival, it's about excess. The problem with obesity. The real issue with obesity is that it's a sign of chronic metabolic dysfunction. It's not just about carrying the extra weight, it's about what's happening inside your body. Obesity is one of the hallmarks of metabolic syndrome, a cluster of conditions that include high blood sugar, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, low HDL, good cholesterol, high triglycerides, and abdominal obesity, excess fat around the waist. These conditions are all driven by insulin resistance and chronic inflammation, which are caused by constantly elevated insulin levels. And while not everyone with metabolic syndrome is obese, obesity is often the first visible warning sign. The lie: eat less and exercise more. For decades, the official advice for weight loss has been to eat fewer calories and exercise more, but this approach has failed miserably. Let's look at the evidence. In the Women's Health Initiative, a massive study involving nearly 50,000 postmenopausal women, participants were told to reduce their fat intake, eat more fruits and grains, and exercise more. Over 7 years, they cut their daily calories by 342 and increased their physical activity by 14%. The result? They lost an average of just 4 pounds in the first year and gained most of it back by the end of the study. Even worse, their waistlines got bigger, suggesting they were actually gaining fat. Why didn't it work? Because the advice to eat less and exercise more ignores the role of insulin. When you eat a high-carb diet, your insulin levels stay elevated, which tells your body to store fat. Exercise alone can't overcome this hormonal signal. In fact, exercise often makes you hungrier, leading to more eating and ultimately more weight gain. You can't outrun a bad diet. What works? Lowering insulin. If insulin is the real driver of obesity, then the solution is to lower insulin levels. This is why low-carb diets like Atkins and ketogenic diets are so effective. By reducing carbohydrate intake, you lower insulin levels, which allows your body to burn fat for energy. Studies have consistently shown that low-carb diets outperform low-fat diets for weight loss and metabolic health. But even low-carb diets can fail if you're eating all the time. That's where fasting comes in. Fasting gives your body a break from insulin and allows it to switch from growth mode to repair mode. After about 12 hours of fasting, your body burns through its glycogen stores and starts using fat for fuel. This process, called ketosis, is a powerful way to reset your metabolism and promote weight loss. The diet lie: why low-calorie substitutes don't help. What about diet sodas and artificial sweeteners? They may have fewer calories, but they're not helping your insulin levels. In fact, studies show that artificial sweeteners like sucralose and stevia can actually raise insulin levels, even more than sugar in some cases. This means they can still drive fat storage and metabolic dysfunction, despite being calorie-free. If you're trying to lose weight, it's best to avoid both sugar and sugar substitutes. Other factors that drive obesity? Not just about food. Other factors can contribute to obesity, including chronic stress. Stress raises cortisol levels, which can lead to insulin resistance and weight gain. Poor sleep. Sleep deprivation disrupts hormones that regulate hunger and metabolism, making it harder to lose weight. Environmental toxins. Chemicals like BPA and phthalates, known as obesogens, can interfere with your metabolism and promote fat storage. Aging. As we get older, our cells become more resistant to insulin, making it harder to maintain a healthy weight. The idea that obesity is just about eating too much and exercising too little is a lie. The real culprit is insulin, driven by high-carb diets, constant eating, and other lifestyle factors. To lose weight and improve your health, you need to focus on lowering insulin levels through strategies like low-carb diets, fasting, and addressing non-nutritional factors like stress and sleep. It's time to stop blaming ourselves for failed diets and start addressing the real root cause of obesity. Let's move on to the next chapter where we'll tackle another big lie, the dangers of sugar. Chapter 4, the diabetes lie. Let's talk about another big lie we've been told. Sugar is harmless, other than causing weight gain and tooth decay. This is a lie that's been perpetuated by the medical establishment, including organizations like the American Diabetes Association, ADA. According to them, diabetics can eat sugar as long as they adjust their insulin or medications to compensate. But sugar does far more harm than just making us gain weight or giving us cavities. It's a major driver of chronic diseases, including diabetes, and it wreaks havoc on our bodies in ways we're only beginning to fully understand. So let's break it down. What is sugar? Why is it so harmful? And how does it connect to the diabetes epidemic? First, let's clarify what we mean by sugar. Sugar comes in many forms and has countless names: glucose, fructose, sucrose, agave nectar, high fructose corn syrup, and more. Food manufacturers often disguise sugar on labels by using different names, but it's all the same thing, sugar. So glucose is the primary sugar in our bloodstream, and it's the one our body uses for energy. Every cell in the body can use glucose. Fructose, found naturally in fruit, this is the sweetest sugar. Unlike glucose, only the liver can metabolize fructose, and it doesn't directly affect blood sugar or insulin levels. But don't be fooled, fructose has its own dangers, which we'll explore in the next chapter. Sucrose, this is table sugar, combination of one glucose molecule and one fructose molecule. High fructose corn syrup, a processed sweetener made from corn. High fructose corn syrup is about 55% fructose and 45% glucose. It's cheap, widely used, and found in almost every processed food. Problem with sugar isn't just its calories, it's how it affects our metabolism. Refined sugars and carbohydrates are absorbed quickly into the bloodstream, causing blood sugar glucose spikes. These spikes trigger insulin, the hormone that tells your body to store fat. Over time, this leads to insulin resistance, obesity, and a host of chronic diseases. The sweet danger of sugar. Let's address the two harms mentioned in this lie: weight gain and tooth decay. Obesity, as we discussed in the last chapter, isn't just about eating too many calories, it's about insulin. Sugar drives insulin, and insulin drives fat storage. The more sugar you eat, the more insulin you produce, and the more fat you store. Tooth decay. We've all heard that sugar causes cavities, and it's true. Refined sugars feed bacteria like Streptococcus mutans, which produce acids that erode tooth enamel. Interestingly, ancient humans who ate unrefined diets had far fewer cavities. Tooth decay became common only after the advent of agriculture and later the Industrial Revolution, when refined sugars and carbohydrates became widespread. But sugar's harm doesn't stop there. It's also a major driver of type 2 diabetes, a disease that's reached epidemic proportions. The diabetes epidemic. We are in the midst of the largest diabetes epidemic in history. In 1910, only 1 in 30 people had diabetes. Today, 1 in 3 people born after the year 2000 will develop diabetes in their lifetime. More than half of all American adults are already diabetic or pre-diabetic, and it's only getting worse. There are 2 main types of diabetes. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition where the pancreas can't produce enough insulin. It accounts for less than 10% of the diabetes cases. Type 2 diabetes, this is the real epidemic. In type 2 diabetes, the body produces too much insulin because it has become resistant to the hormone. The insulin resistance is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes and is driven by chronic high insulin levels, which are often caused by diets high in sugar and refined carbohydrates. Diabetes is devastating because it affects nearly every organ in the body. It's the number 1 cause of amputations, kidney failure, and blindness. It increases the risk of heart attack, strokes, and Alzheimer's disease, which some researchers now call type 3 diabetes because of its link to insulin resistance in the brain. It also drives all the chronic diseases we've been discussing in this book. How do we diagnose diabetes? Well, it's typically done using blood glucose tests. Either a fasting plasma glucose, FPG, measures blood sugar after fasting for 12 hours. A level of 126 or higher indicates diabetes. Or a hemoglobin A1C test. This measures the average blood sugar levels over the past 3 months. A level of 6.5% or higher indicates diabetes. But here's the problem. These tests only measure glucose, not insulin. By the time your blood sugar is high enough to diagnose diabetes, you've likely had insulin resistance for years, possibly decades. Insulin resistance is the real root cause of type 2 diabetes, but it's not part of the standard diagnostic criteria. This means we're missing a huge window of opportunity to prevent or reverse the disease. The role of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is when your body becomes less responsive to insulin, so your pancreas has to produce more of it to keep blood sugar under control. This creates a vicious cycle. High insulin levels drive more resistance, which require even more insulin. Over time, this leads to type 2 diabetes. But insulin resistance doesn't affect all of insulin's functions equally. While your body becomes resistant to insulin's ability to regulate blood sugar, it remains sensitive to insulin's other effects, like fat storage and inflammation. This means you can still gain weight and develop chronic diseases even as your blood sugar appears normal. The dangers of high blood sugar: when the blood sugar levels rise too high, hyperglycemia, it causes damage throughout the body. Glycation. Excess glucose binds to proteins, damaging them in the process called glycation. This creates harmful compounds called advanced glycation end products, AGEs, which contribute to aging and inflammation. Organ damage. High blood sugar damages the endothelial glycocalyx, a protective lining in blood vessels. This leads to complications like blindness, kidney failure, and amputations. And brain damage. High blood sugar is linked to Alzheimer's disease, which some experts now call type 3 diabetes. Even in non-diabetics, frequent blood sugar spikes can be harmful. This is why it's so important to avoid foods that cause glucose spikes, like refined sugars and carbohydrates. Problem with insulin therapy. For type 1 diabetics, insulin therapy is life-saving. But for type 2 diabetics, adding more insulin to an already high insulin state can do more harm than good. While it may lower blood sugar, it's also increasing insulin resistance, fat storage, and inflammation. This is why intensive glucose control with insulin in type 2 diabetics has not been shown to reduce heart attacks or mortality. It's treating the symptom of high blood sugar while worsening the root cause, high insulin. The solution is cut the sugar. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. The solution isn't more medication, it's reducing sugar and refined carbohydrates in the diet. Low-carb diets have been shown to reverse type 2 diabetes, in some cases putting the disease into remission. Yet mainstream medicine has been slow to embrace this approach. In some countries, the danger of sugar are taken more seriously. For example, in Sri Lanka, sugar packages come with warning labels, much like cigarettes. Imagine if we did that here. Bottom line, sugar isn't just empty calories. It's a toxic substance that drives insulin resistance, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. To protect your health, you need to minimize sugar and refined carbohydrates in your diet. And if you're already diabetic or pre-diabetic, it's not too late. Lifestyle changes like low-carb diets and intermittent fasting can help reverse the damage. Next, we'll dive into sugar's harmless little sidekick, fructose. Spoiler alert, it's not as innocent as it seems. Stay tuned. Chapter 5. The Fatty Liver Lie. So let's talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD as it's called. It's a mouthful, I know, but it's something you really need to know about. Why? Because it's the most common liver disease in the world right now, and it's sneaky. It didn't even exist before the 1980s. Today, 1 in 3 people has it, and it's the leading cause of liver transplants in women. Yet, if you ask most people, or even some doctors, they've barely heard of it. Crazy, right? The medical community often says there's no treatment for NAFLD. That's the lie. There is a treatment, and it's not some fancy drug or complicated procedure. Before we get to that, let's unpack what's going on here. What is NAFLD, and why should you care? NAFLD is a condition where fat builds up in your liver, but it's not because of alcohol. That's a different type of fatty liver disease. This is a silent condition. Most people don't even know they have it until it's too late. It starts with fat deposits in the liver, called steatosis, which can lead to inflammation, steatohepatitis, and eventually scarring, fibrosis, or even liver failure. At that point, you're looking at symptoms like confusion, tremors, even bleeding from your bowels. Not fun. Here's the scary part. NAFLD is becoming the new normal. It's not just people who are overweight or diabetic who get it. Then people can have it too. It's a sign of a deeper metabolic problem that's affecting all of us. So what changed in the 1980s? Here's where things get interesting. Before the 1980s, fatty liver disease was almost always caused by alcohol. But then cases of NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, started skyrocketing. Even in people who didn't drink, doctors were baffled. And when kids started showing up with fatty liver, it became clear this wasn't about alcohol. Something else was poisoning our livers. To figure it out, let's take a detour into history. Ever hear of foie gras? That's the fancy French dish made from fatty liver of ducks or geese. And how do they make it? By force-feeding the animals massive amounts of carbs, specifically sugar. And that's the clue. Starting in the 1980s, our sugar consumption, especially high fructose corn syrup, went through the roof. That's when NAFLD appeared. The real culprit is fructose. Fructose is the villain of this story. It's a type of sugar found in fruit, but the problem isn't the small amounts in whole fruit. It's the massive doses we get from processed foods and sugary drinks. Fructose is metabolized almost entirely by the liver, and when you overload your liver with it, bad things happen. It gets turned into fat, which builds up in the liver and causes inflammation, insulin resistance, and eventually liver damage. And fructose acts a lot like alcohol in your body. Both are toxins that your liver has to process. Both cause fat buildup, inflammation, even addiction. That's right, fructose can mess with your brain's reward system, making you crave more of it, just like alcohol does. Diagnosing NAFLD, why it's often missed. One of the reasons NAFLD flies under the radar is that it's usually asymptomatic until it's advanced. Blood tests can sometimes catch it, but they're not foolproof. Try this again. The best way to diagnose it is with a liver biopsy or imaging tests like ultrasounds or CT scans. But even when imaging shows fatty liver, doctors often don't mention it unless it's severe. It's so common now that it's almost considered normal. That's a huge problem. The lie? There's no treatment. Now back to that lie. The medical community often says there's no treatment for NAFLD, but that's not true. If alcoholic fatty liver disease is caused by alcohol and stopping alcohol can reverse it, then it stands to reason that stopping the other toxin, fructose, can reverse NAFLD. And guess what? Studies show that this works. In one study, kids with fatty liver were put on a diet that replaced sugar with starch. So no fructose, but the same calories. After just 9 days, their liver fat decreased significantly. No calorie restriction, no fancy drugs, just cutting out the fructose. Similar results have been seen in adults on low-carb diets. The bigger picture, fructose and metabolic syndrome. Fructose doesn't just cause fatty liver. It's a major driver of metabolic syndrome, which includes the conditions like obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. It messes with your hormones, making you feel hungrier and less full. It also causes inflammation, raises uric acid levels, leading to gout and other problems, and even contributes to dementia and cancer. And your body can make fructose from other carbs, so even if you avoid sugar, a high-carb diet can still lead to problems. The solution is cut the fructose. Good news is that NAFLD is preventable and reversible. The key is to cut out the excess fructose. That means avoiding sugary drinks, processed foods, and anything with high fructose corn syrup. It's not about eliminating all carbs, just the ones your liver can't handle. And if we start calling NAFLD what it really is, fructose-associated fatty liver disease, maybe more people will take it seriously. So there you have it. NAFLD isn't some mysterious, untreatable condition. It's a modern disease caused by a modern diet. And the solution is simple. Stop poisoning your liver with fructose. It's time to take back control of our health. Chapter 6, The Hypertension Lie. Let's talk about hypertension or high blood pressure, and the big lie surrounding it, that it's best treated with drugs. Spoiler alert, it's not. But before we dive into why, let's set the stage. We've already covered some grim stats. Half of adults are overweight or obese, half are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and half have fatty liver disease. Now, add to this mix, 47% of adults, 116 million people in the U.S. have hypertension. And many of these conditions overlap. So if you don't have one, you probably have another. It's a metabolic mess, and hypertension is right in the middle of it. So what is hypertension and why is it so dangerous? Hypertension is when your blood pressure is too high. Blood pressure is the force your heart uses to pump blood through your body. It's measured in two numbers, systolic, top number, the pressure when your heart beats, and diastolic, the pressure when your heart rests. A normal reading is 120 over 80, but anything above 130 over 80 is considered hypertension. Scary thing about hypertension is that it's a silent killer. You can have it for years without knowing, and it quietly wreaks havoc on your body. It stiffens your arteries, weakens your heart, and also damages your kidneys. It can lead to strokes, heart attacks, and even dementia, and because it's so common, it's often overlooked until it's too late. Why is hypertension so common now? Hypertension wasn't always this widespread. Back in 1900, less than 5% of people had it. Today, that number has skyrocketed. So what changed? Our diets. The rise of processed foods, sugar, and high fructose corn syrup has been a disaster for our health. And just like obesity and diabetes, hypertension is largely a result of our modern lifestyle. The role of nitric oxide, NO. To understand hypertension, we need to talk about nitric oxide, NO. This tiny molecule is a big deal. It helps your blood vessels relax and dilate, which lowers blood pressure. It also prevents blood clots and supports brain function. But when something disrupts NO production, nitric oxide production, your blood vessels stay tense and your blood pressure rises. One major disruptor, uric acid. And what causes high uric acid levels? You guessed it, fructose. That sneaky sugar we've talked about before doesn't just cause fatty liver, it also blocks nitric oxide production, driving up blood pressure. And it's not just fructose. Alcohol and even salt can activate pathways in your body that lead to more uric acid and less nitric oxide. The problem with treating hypertension with drugs. Here's where the lie comes in. The medical system tells us that hypertension is best treated with drugs, and yes, medications can lower blood pressure in the short term. But they don't address the root cause. It's like mopping up a puddle without fixing the leaky roof. The underlying problem, your lifestyle, remains, and the damage keeps piling up. For example, when I was diagnosed with hypertension, I was told to take medication. My blood pressure went down, but my other problems, high blood sugar, high uric acid, and fatty blood, didn't go away. I was just adding more pills to my daily routine without fixing the real issue, my diet and lifestyle. The real solution is lifestyle changes. Truth is, hypertension is often a symptom of a larger metabolic problem. Treating it with drugs alone won't fix obesity, diabetes, or fatty liver. The real solution is to change your lifestyle. Here's what works. 1. Cut back on sugar and fructose. This reduces uric acid levels and helps your blood vessels function properly. 2. Limit salt intake. While salt isn't as bad as sugar, it can still contribute to hypertension, especially if your diet is already high in sugar. 3. Reduce alcohol consumption. Alcohol not only raises blood pressure, but also increases uric acid levels. 4. Exercise regularly. Even something as simple as walking 30 minutes a day can make a big difference. And lastly, 5. Get enough sleep. Poor sleep is linked to higher blood pressure and other metabolic issues. These changes aren't easy, but they're effective, and unlike drugs, they address the root cause of hypertension, not just the symptoms. Why the system fails us. So why don't doctors focus on lifestyle changes? It's not because they're hiding the truth. It's because the system isn't set up for it. The average doctor visit lasts just 17 minutes. Patients want quick fixes, and doctors prescribe pills because that's what the system rewards. But pills only treat the symptoms, not the cause, and that's why so many people end up on a lifetime of medication without ever getting better. The bottom line here, hypertension isn't just a condition, it's a warning sign that something's wrong with your metabolism. Treating it with drugs might lower your blood pressure, but it won't fix the underlying problem. The real solution lies in changing your diet, exercising, and taking care of your body. It's not easy, but it's worth it. After all, you only have one body and one brain. Don't waste them. That's the truth about hypertension. It's not about the pills. It's about the choices we make every day. Let's fix the roof instead of mopping the floor.
So we'll stop here. Next time we'll pick up with Chapter 7, the cardiovascular lie. I hope you'll join us again for Part 2 of Lies I Taught in Medical School by Robert Lufkin, MD. That's a wrap.